Hey, thanks for joining me. Hopefully you have caught up to the Railsplitter Woodshop tour. If you haven't and you want to go see the whole tour of the shop, go give that video a watch and then come back to this one. Otherwise, today's video is going to be about our two saw stops. Actually, I think I might throw a third saw in there and just go ahead and do our third table saw that we strictly dedicate just for our dado stack. So I want these videos to be informative to my students about the way we use these tools, some safety things, some feature things on these tools, and go from there. So if you want to see anything else or see anything more, then please just send me a message and comment down below. So we do have two saw stops in this shop. If you don't know what a saw stop is a table saw that is connected, it's hooked up to a computer inside that is constantly reading the electrical pulse. It shoots a light voltage through the blade. So what happens is that as this low voltage is being shot through the blade, the computer's constantly reading the voltage. And if your finger ever comes in contact with the moving blade, or a wet board can also create this. I believe sometimes metals and plastics can also do it. But anything that sets that trip off, it instantly throws a break into the blade instantaneously, and it drops the blade at the same time. So this is a safety feature designed from you cutting your finger. If you want to go see more on that, SawStop has videos out of people holding like a hot dog on top of a board and taking that board across, and as soon as it touches the hot dog, it barely takes the skin off of it. So when you consider that you have to replace the brake, and typically the blade's ruined and then the brake has to be replaced, but normally $200 to $300 versus not cutting your finger off is a pretty good trade-off. On top of that, the quality of these table saws is insane. They are very, very nice tools. It's not a thing where, well, a junky company just went and put the safety feature on their saw. No, these are, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with working with like commercial cabinet style table saws, but these are the nicest saws that I've ever worked with. So a couple things to keep in mind is always keeping your fingers away from the blade. Like, you don't want to assume that just because there's the safety feature on this saw that you're okay to just forget about safety. That's not the way this works. We have a lot of table saws. We can create binding, which leads to kickback. There's a few things that we can do to prevent that from happening, which I'll show here. A few things also to keep in mind are to use what are called push sticks. I also have a gripper. Micro Jig will send you, if you're a school shop, Micro Jig will send you 2 of these. They sent us 2 of them. One other jig that I'll show real quick is a miter jig that we use for when we use picture frames. So one of the first things I'm going to do here is just kind of identify some of the parts and the pieces that we're going to be working with. Okay, this is called your table. Pretty simple, right? Table saw, table. All right. We do have miter gauges that we can use to slide through these, I don't know what the machine part is, but it's basically a dado that slides into these machine parts. And you can see we have an outfeed table, which is really nice. And we also have a side feed table. So we can easily cut 4-foot wide panels or whatever on here because of the side feed table and the outfeed table. This is called a fence. And the fence here is literally what cuts the width of our wood. A few things to keep in mind is that this saw is set up that our fence is going to create, we need one nice, clean, smooth edge. And something I've noticed some students doing is that they'll try and take rough sawn lumber that hasn't been cleaned up on either edge, and they'll try and take a rough sawn lumber through here. Well, what you'll get is you'll get blade binding. And as that board gets pushed through and the grain wants to push that blade, you'll hear the RPMs drop on the blade. So you want to avoid stuff like that. So something I'm going to show is just a really nice clear piece of pine, just 1x. And what I mean by ripping is we are going to cut in the direction. If you see this grain here, I'll draw out this on the marker so it's a little bit easier to see. But you can see our grain pattern is going that way. We want to cut with the grain. We want to cut parallel to the grain when we are going to use a saw like this, and we are going to cut the width down of the board, okay? Another common mistake I've seen my students getting into is if they have to take, like, let's say this is a 3.5 inch board, and they have to take 1/2 inch off. They want this down to 3 inches. Well, what they'll do is they'll measure their distance in between the fence and the blade instead of the other way around, okay? I personally like to keep my hands and the pressure in between the blade and the fence, not on the outside. And so in order to do that, if I want to cut 1/2 inch off this board, what I'm really gonna do is, let's say if I wanted to keep the 3 inches, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure that piece. I don't have a tape measure on me, but I do have this square, which was conveniently right by me. I'd like to say that was set up for camera, but it wasn't. So I can measure my distance in between the inside of the blade and the fence to be 3 inches. So as you can see, that is not there. If I'm looking down here, I'm looking from 0, so it's like 4 1/4 or something like that. I am not going to get precise because I'm doing this one-handed. So now let's pretend here that now I'm between there and 3. And if I'm looking, if that long line right there is my 3 inch, you can see I'm dead on 3 inches. So now I'm 3 inches in between the fence and the blade. And so now I can set this up to cut with the blade. Always make sure your safety glasses are on. Always. What I'm gonna do is, so now I'm ready to cut this blade along with the parallel. I'm just gonna use a push stick. I did this on the CNC machine over there. You can make these by hand, but this one is gonna catch back here. My personal preference, I like to keep my hands safely on this as long as possible. So a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll always start with my board off of the blade. I never want to start here. Start with my board off of the blade, back, plenty of time to get stopped and started. Okay, another good rule of thumb is that if you see where the blade is at, you see how the blade is sticking pretty high, at least a finger's width high above. So what I'm going to do is down below here, I have a wheel. I adjust, and my general rule of thumb is 2 to 3 teeth sticking above the board. So if I count, there are, right now, I have 4 teeth sticking above. So I'm going to keep taking that down right about to there. So I'm going to keep my hands here. I'm going to keep pressure against the fence. Push it all the way through. So the next thing I'm going to show real quick is this micro jig, which they are really nice. I really do like them. They are adjustable so that your blade misses in between here and always goes in between. This part here also adjusts for the height to compensate so that this thing is always sitting flat. Sometimes if you get a small enough skinny board, if you're sitting here and riding along, you can get a lot of movement left and right, and that is bad. You don't want that. So what I will do, instead of trying to measure anything, I just lay this jig down on top of the board, and I loosen this, and I let this piece come down and sit flat on the saw. And once that's there, I tighten here, and I tighten here, and now, no movement left and right at all. So now I don't have to worry about this thing rolling on me as I'm trying to push it through. So that is one really nice safety feature. So the next thing, if I can bring this up, my blade is gonna hit like right here. And if you notice, there's this little adjustment here and this little same adjustment on the back side. What I can do is I can loosen those up. You can see where a blade's been through there. Joys of a shop teacher. But I slide that over, okay? And so now I just took this piece here, that was here and slid it over to this point. So now you can see that my blade is going to miss this part right here, that's what I wanted. So I want my blade to miss that part, and now I can bring that guy through. So there we go. So now I've used just this regular push stick, and now I've used the micro jig, and the last thing I'm going to show you real quick is this quick little miter jig that we have. So I found what do we call these, barber check, like lost and forgotten souls or whatever they are. I forgot, it's a leftover project, somebody didn't come pick up. And so anyways, this would be a good one to show. You can see the splines that we create in here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we get those. Basically, we miter the picture frame, which I think I'm going to try and do a video and just do one of these picture frames real quick. But we do a picture frame, and then for some added strength is we cut in these splines that slide in here. So I'll show you how we do that. So this is the way this spline jig works, is that we built it to slide on top of the fence here. So it rides really nice and smooth. So what we're doing is when we have, this has obviously been stained, but before we stain, after we glue up all four corners, we won't have a spline here in our corners. And so what we do is we bring this guy over here and we lay it into our jig, and then we push it through as the blade is on, and we make that cut into there. So I set that fence up left and right to get it centered, and the next thing I'm gonna do is bring my blade up so that I can cut into that spline. I don't know how well you can see, but there I'm 1/2 inch above this corner. The blade is about a 1/2 inch corner above the blade. So now what I will do is I try and get students in the habit of putting the back side of their picture frame to this side here, and then we're gonna go and take that right across there. If I stay tight, there you go. See that cut? So now all I do is rotate. And so I don't know how well you can see the spline they have is a little off center. But so now you've got 4 splines, and then we'll lay those splines in there, glue them in, hand cut them, hand sand them, there you go. A couple of quick safety things that I want to point out here. One cut that I never ever want to see made on a table saw is this cut right here. I've seen some of my students try and do this where they have to take like a 2x4 or something like this, and they have to cut it at 12 inches up. And they want to put, there's the fence, they move the fence over to 12, and they try and either go like this or like this. This is literally one of the most dangerous cuts you can make in woodworking, okay? So, again, always keep in mind that we're wanting to rip and cut parallel and to cut this way. That includes even like plywood, when we're trying to cut plywood. This is also an extremely dangerous cut. My general rule of thumb is we are wider than we are deep. That is bad, okay? You don't want to pinch in between the fence and the blade right here, okay? This cut is okay here. This cut, not okay here, all right? So keep those things in mind. If we have to do this cut, we've got a miter saw or we have a crosscut sled that we can go to. This is our other SawStop. Saw is set up the exact same, and if we ever have to, we can always just lose the sled and bring the fence over, and we can rip with this if we need to. But it is really nice, number one, safety-wise in a high school shop, having a cross-cut sled. It saves us a lot. Next thing, we do have some stop blocks here that go on this fence that we like to use. Anytime that we can just take out measuring, is a good way to go. I used to think that the best woodworkers were like really good at measuring. You know what a lot of them are good at? Just being able to repeat the process and then making it look like they know what they're doing. But if we have to make a bunch of repetitive cuts, this is one of the best and safest ways to be able to do this. Let's say I have to make a bunch of 2-inch cuts. My general rule of thumb, the blade, we're sticking a few teeth out above the blade here. I typically say 2 to 3 on that rip saw. On the crosscut sled, a little less, but I'll bring it down right about to there. Okay? Usually about 1/4 of an inch is about what you want to be at. Okay? So again, we got to make a bunch of these cuts. This is a great, safe way to be able to do it. I would take a tape measure and I'll measure in between my stop block and my blade. Bring that back, just make my cuts. So there we go. And I might modify these sleds a little bit. I've seen some where the cutoff piece just falls down and doesn't come back, and that's probably a little bit safer even than this one. But these have been really good, safe sleds for us to use. Again, my other thought is normally I want students, their piece to be able to fit on the sled before they cross-cut here. Otherwise, I like them to go over to the miter saw and use that for the longer cuts. But for the smaller pieces, when we're doing boxes and picture frames, we're using a picture frame jig, a 45-degree jig here that we use. And I can lay in here and I can make those cuts just like that. So I like to use a clamp here to be able to clamp this miter jig down. And this is the way that we do our picture frames. I'm probably gonna redo this jig. I've seen some others that I like a little bit better than this one. There's some that are a lot nicer, and I'll probably try and do something that's a little bit adjustable. We can just do 45s with this. I've seen some that have like toggle bolts on them that they can adjust, and that would be really nice. And also, the one problem with this jig is you can only do the bottom corner. So that's it. You really have to cut your piece down to exact length first and then 45 your 2 ends. Whereas I've seen some that they're left out on the open and they can be cut at any dimension that you want, which would be a better way to go about this. But I'll show you how we do this one real quick. And then you can either flip here, or you can also go this way. So now you've quickly got 2 45s, really safe, easy way to do it. Like I said, I'm probably gonna change that jig up and do something different, but really easy way to go about it. This is our Rockwell Unisaw, and although we don't use it a whole lot, it is really nice to be able to have this thing dedicated just for our dados. It doesn't have an outfeed table, side feed tables or anything. It's primarily used for pieces are cut down, shelving is cut down and whatever. We're gonna use it that way. So what I'll do is, so this is set up to cut 1/2-inch dados for us. And so all we do is we have a fence here, locks in, and then you can set this up to wherever we need this dado at. So let's say we just want to come, let's say this is like the side of a box and we just want to come like 1/2 an inch up. So we can bring that guy right to there. I do like our students to use these micro jigs on this because normally their hand is passing right over the top of the piece and the blade, the moving blade, and so this is a really good safe way to get their hands away from there. Five questions. What can cause the SawStop to trigger? So think about those first two SawStops that we have. Name anything that can make those the blade trip, the brake trip into the blade and snap down. How many SawStops do we have? Not how many table saws we have, but how many SawStops? True or false? Both table saws, both SawStops, can be used for cross-cutting. Number 4, what is the Rockwell table saw used for? The third saw. What is it dedicated for? And number 5, for the cross-cut sled. This is a true-false question. I forgot to write that. Number 5, true or false? For the cross-cut sled, the piece must fit onto the sled in order to be cut. True or false? I'll give you a hint. That's my rule. So anyways, I hope you guys are enjoying the videos. Leave a comment down below. Let me know you're watching. And if you have any suggestions or something else you'd like to see here in the Railsplitter Woodshop, let me know. Peace out.